Here we are, ready to go over the details and information that will be included under Domain 4, covering the topics that you may be tested on when you sit for the HCISPP exam. Let's go. Okay, so this is information governance, and it sounds very close to what the English words mean, and that is governing or overseeing and caring for the information of which we are in charge. Okay, so the first thing you want to make sure that you review are the various types of information, those relating to both patients and staff. Remember, we are looking at both a healthcare aspect as well as a business aspect. So financial, accounting records, administrative aspects, as well as patients and staff demographics and the details of whatever it is we do for them. Also make sure that you review who owns the information. Now, on the health information side, it's very direct yet gray. Okay, so officially, the facility owns the health record. However, the patient has rights to it. But when we're talking about the technical structures of these records, it becomes even more complex. There is an information system owner, an information system steward, an information system security officer, and an end user. And I do remember questions about the responsibility of the owner versus the owner steward versus the security officer. So make sure that you review these details in your textbook. And remember that everything has to do with CIA, and I do not mean, the governmental agency in charge of spying. We're talking about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, certainly part of looking out and governing and caring for and protecting the information is the aspect of risk management. And this domain is going to go into it quite in depth. Okay, there are aspects and layers to risk management. And they begin with understanding how to approach the risk. There's framing risk, and I don't mean like framing it and making blame on somebody else. This has to do with the strategy, the identification of how much variance can we have, and then we have assessing the risk, which you will find is probably something you've already covered in one of your other health information management courses, because doing a risk assessment is absolutely job number one in health information and health informatics. Responding to risk, you must have a response protocol. So this is not just, well, of course we're identifying the risks, the vulnerabilities, but then you have to have a plan of action. And you have to have a plan of action for those potential breaches or other issues. And you have to write it down as a policy and a procedure for the organization to have agreement and to have direction what to do in emergency. And then, of course, there's the monitoring risk, and that would be, of course, not only for that risk or vulnerabilities that we know about and say, well, we have a tolerance for that, that's okay, we can deal with that. You have to keep an eye on that, but you also have to keep a continuous eye on new vulnerabilities popping up, because stuff happens. All right, so as we look at the risk management approach, and you'll see that this graphic kind of illustrates what we were just talking about with regard to how to address this. Respond, assess, Monitor? No. Monitor, assess, respond. It, instead of being a big circle like you have with PDSA or PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, or Plan, Do, Study, Act, this is a triangle. And in the center of it is that frame that houses the information. Now, these risk assessment steps, I believe they are in your textbook, and you want to become familiar with them because they also give you that checklist for what needs to be done, when, and how. And this is very important. Remember that one of the strongest things we need to do for our staff members and for upholding our jobs to protect the information is to make sure that while everybody has a clear head, we can be specific in how people should behave when something goes wrong. And that is essential with every management or leadership position. Is your goal always, every day, day to day, is to keep things on an even keel, moving along slowly, and avoid potholes, avoid problems. But at the same exact time, you have to be prepared because something will go wrong. And it's not an if, it's a when. And so your job is to make sure that you are prepared for it before it happens, for anything that can be predicted. And when we look at historical issues, that can give us a great framework for structuring excellence in the future. All right, so, information is an asset in and of itself, but then there are different risk levels assigned to different types of data. Obviously, from medical identity theft and financial identity theft, we have certainly financial information, financial data, like the patient's credit card number or their health insurance policy number, are at a very high risk because they have very high asset value to those who might steal them. Okay. We also have low-level risk. Okay. And it is part of our responsibility to make sure that not everything is brushed with the same broom. And what I mean by that is not all data is, oh my gosh, super secret. Okay. We've talked about in previous domains the super confidentiality of data that has to do with HIV status or mental health issues, things like that. And if you remember, there were 5 items on the super confidential list. So those assets are at higher level of risk because they are already deemed to have greater protections to them. So therefore, everything must be evaluated so that you can use your resources appropriately. Okay? You wouldn't put a credit card or one of those refund cards, that only has $10 available on it, like a gift card. You wouldn't put that in a big safe in the vault of a bank, and it certainly wouldn't make sense for you to pay $50 a month for the safety deposit box in a bank just to put in a $10 gift card, right? Right, that's easy to see. And that's essentially a good analogy when we talk about high level of risk versus lower level of risk, and that this must be identified. Then we have the difference between tangible assets and intangible assets. And, certainly something physical, tangible, like a laptop computer, that's easy for you to understand. The loss if that computer is stolen. But then there's the intangible asset valuation, not only with regard to the protected health information that was on that laptop, and you have government fines and penalties related to that, but you also have that reputation. And as I think you've learned already about the notification rules about breaching we talked about in a previous domain, if you have to go to the media and tell the media we lost all these patients' information, then that is going to hurt your facility, because certain patients are going to think twice about coming to a facility where they can't be confident that their secrets are going to be kept and protected. And then in addition to that, you have the aspect of intellectual property. Now, it's very important that you understand that we have those tangible values, okay? The latest and greatest software, the latest and greatest hardware, the best training, okay? But I'm sure you have already seen evidence that the same exact education does not function the same way in the same brain, okay? That's why you have students in the same exact class listening to the same lectures, reading the same chapters, taking the same exam, and one student can get an A or a B while another student gets a C or a D. That is intellectual property, the way individuals behave. And I also think you have probably noticed this in your healthcare as a patient, right? When you go to your regular physician's office, you might say, oh, I like that nurse. She's always so nice to me, and she's gentle when she takes my blood pressure, whatever. And then you have that, oh, I don't like that other one, or that person at the reception desk is always nasty. He's always saying, what do you want? Like, oh, well, excuse me for bothering you. Okay, so this has value as well. So what does that have to do with health informatics? Because it's all bundled together, it's all connected. And when you think about it, you understand. A vulnerability is a weakness. It's a sore spot. It's an opening through which a clever bad person can sneak through the gate, okay? A secretary away from a station who has access to a system and doesn't log off, and for some reason the IT people didn't put an automatic log off, okay? Or insufficient training on security and privacy protocols. Situations where people share their passwords. Oh my God, you have to stop that, okay? And patching configuration of systems. We know that in 2017, the WannaCry hacking ransomware affected the British hospital system so severely because they were not up to date with their patches and their configurations. These are all vulnerabilities, and you must know them, and you must make sure that they are closed to the best of your ability, and to make sure that there are no weaknesses in the wall. Exposure is a system configuration. It could be an error in the software, that a glitch, as we commonly call it, that can be a stepping stone into the main system or the network or the server. And some of you may be savvy enough in IT to know how that can be done. But essentially, if you think about a maze, okay? If the front door is locked and you have the ability to breach the front door, maybe you come really close behind someone who has the password, okay? You can sneak in that building and you can make your way through to wherever you want to go. It happens every day. This is just done without a physical presence. This is all done through cyberspace. But that's exactly why we have people on our team that know about these things so that they can be shut off. But they can only be identified through a risk assessment and then acted upon. The threats that we have to deal with, 5 different types of threats. And these are important for you to understand the conceptual aspect of what we are dealing with. Human error, okay? It might be just an accident. We all do it. It's part of being human. You know, you hit the wrong key or something like that. But then you also have malicious humans who do bad things. Natural threats are Mother Nature made, usually. Hurricanes, fire, flood, earthquakes. All of these are threats to our system and to the continuity of us being able to collect information, store information, protect information, analyze information, make information available when necessary, protecting the integrity of information. And technical is square in our offices, right? Hardware failure, software virus, these things happen. It's not necessarily your fault, but it is your job to look for them, find them, and correct them. Environmental threats are a little bit different than natural threats in that this could be hazardous waste, it could be a biological agent, it could be sabotage from a terrorist, and operational threats in which, and in part this goes back to human, but first it is our job to make sure that we set up protocols that specifically govern to protect CIA confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and then make certain that there are consequences for those who do not follow protocols. Because yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is a big deal. When you see the word likelihood, this is again very familiar to the English word as you may use it or hear it, which is, this is the percentage or the weighted risk factor, probability, if you will, very close to likelihood. This is the probability of something actually happening. So 1 out of 10, that's a 10% chance that bad something could happen. Or there could be a 0.01, that's 1/100th of 1% chance of happening. And that goes back to, if you remember, when we were talking about low-level risk and high-level risk. This is all part of that analysis that we need to look at and compare. And the impact is, so what happens, realistically, what happens if this bad thing happens, okay? If a hurricane strikes us, or if we're hacked, if we get hit by ransomware, or if there is a short circuit in the server, what exactly is the damage? What's the bad? What happens, okay? Somebody loses their password. Okay, well, depending upon how long it takes, we issue another password, we deactivate the previous password, and we check the system for audits of what happened in between. And basically, that could be very negligible for the impact of something like that. But a short circuit in the server could be loss of tremendous amounts of information, interfere with physicians' ability to actually treat patients. So this is all part of the analysis that you're going to do to not only calculate risk and vulnerability or risk, but what level of risk it will be. And we have a nice little formula for you. R equals V times T times I, and that's risk equals threat times vulnerability times impact times likelihood. Whoops, likelihood didn't get into the little thing there. Okay, so you have that threat we were talking about. You have a vulnerability that you've identified, the impact of what would happen if, the likelihood of if it will happen, and that all calculates into the risk, the level of risk of a successful breach or a successful exploitation. All right. And then as we look at these risks, we look at employing safeguards, which is what we're going to do, the action. And it might be code, it might be a lock on the door, it might be strong passwords, it might be biometrics, whatever it is, that is going to be a countermeasure to the vulnerability, to patch that flaw, sew up that weakness, and strengthen our system. This is all you, baby. All right. So how will we do that? Well, we can look at controls. And when we look at these controls, make sure you review the security rule, HIPAA's security rule. There's a very good summary on the Health and Human Services OCR, Office of Civil Rights website. Just Google HIPAA's security rule summary. It'll get you right to it. And this will give you excellent explanation about exactly what these controls are. So administrative or management controls, technical or logical controls, and operational or physical controls. Residual risk is going to be a compensating control that we may use that will enable us to reduce a high risk down to a low or maybe even a low medium risk where we have a tolerance. We can have a tolerance for that risk. So this is an important thing for you to understand the concept of. Risk acceptance. This is something you do every day in your life, okay? We just have to apply it to this information, this requirement, these tasks. So remember we talked before, again, about the levels of risk. And the lower the risk, the lower you can accept that risk. Okay? The higher the risk, the higher you must work, or the more you must work to mitigate or minimize the risk, so that you do not have to worry about how strong the impact is or how weak the vulnerability is. And here's what we call, and the book refers to this as the multi-tiered risk management process. And this helps you, I happen to be a visual learner, so I try to include these graphics to help you more smoothly digest so that you understand what we're talking about with regard to risk management and where we fit in the entire strategic management of the organization. And we have a risk management framework. And I can tell you that I actually consciously seem to remember a question about this risk framework being on my HCISPP test. It's just kind of this little blip in my brain. But the point is that you need to understand the steps involved of this framework, what you need to do, and what needs to be resulting from this entire process. And I can tell you the result in a simple term, which is greater risk mitigation, lower risk vulnerability. That's always, of course, our ideal. Well, our ideal, I guess, would be no risk at all, but we all understand that that's not possible. Okay, the SOMAP risk assessment workflow is another graphic representation of how we keep going around in circles with this same Sometimes it feels like you're going in circles, right? Okay. As long as it's becoming more familiar and you kind of, each time you progress to a little more light bulb going on over your head, that would be good. Okay. But the fact is that we do go in circles with regard to this process and this workflow, because as you patch up one hole in the side of the boat, you know that coming soon will be another, because that's how technology works. So this is ongoing. Continuity must be a watchword in how you run this department. Remediation action plans. This is when we are able to identify a vulnerability that we can actually get rid of. We can actually make it go away so that it isn't a problem anymore. And this is also known as a CAP, Corrective Action Plan. These are very important because knowing about a risk, doing an analysis, understanding and identifying vulnerabilities is not enough. You have to figure out how to fix it, how to monitor it. What is it that needs to be done? Figure that out, make a plan, and then do it. Because otherwise, you're chewing gum with no nutrition, okay? Additional training opportunities. It's an easy solution, okay? Additional security and privacy mechanisms, maybe moving from username and password to biometrics, a fingerprint, is going to make the difference to close up that hole in the wall, okay? And maintenance, and we talked about this before, is those updates. This is not optional, this is mandatory. Risk treatment, and I seem to remember that we discussed this before, I think in Domain 3, but it's important enough for me to repeat this, is you need to know the different availabilities to you. What can you do now that you have identified a risk or a vulnerability? Can you remediate it, your corrective action plan, and fix it? All better. Yay. Okay. Is it mitigation? Well, you can lessen it from a high-level risk to a low-level risk. You can transfer it and make it somebody else's problem, although that's not as easy as it sounds. You can just accept it, although that could be very dangerous. And you can avoid it, which is also possible if you put your mind to it and figure it out. It's very important that we communicate with each other, that you communicate with your staff, and I will tell you this, as well as your executive board, your board of directors, whomever. You not only need to tell them, oh my God, we have a problem, you need to help them understand the severity of the problem, the impact, the threat to the organization, the patients, the facility itself, and to provide them with options so they can understand your recommendation for fixing the problem or dealing with the problem. And I will tell you that, and you may have found this out yourself, is, when you go to a store or somewhere and they say, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And you say, why not? And they say, well, that's our policy. And all that does is make you more angry. Well, yeah. But if people would stop and explain why the policy is necessary, 95% of people don't get more angry. They go, thank you for talking to me and explaining to me. Now I understand. Now I need some options how to get around this or how to fix the problem, whatever. Okay? So that good communication upwards to the executive boardroom as well as with your staff. You don't want to become your parents. Remember when you were little and your parents would say, and you would say, why do I need to do this? And your parent would say, because I said so. And that would just make you mad. And right, we all swear, when I become a parent, I am never going to say that. And son of a gun, sometimes it slips out. But you need to avoid that with your staff, not because I'm from the IT department or the health informatics department and I tell you to do this or don't do that. Don't treat them like ignorant children. Educate them, because when they understand, their compliance will be so much higher. There are, of course, going to be exceptions, because you learned that in school when you were little, right? There's exception to every rule. You need to document any necessary exceptions completely, because when the auditors come, and they will come, you need to make sure that you are being able to support any necessary exceptions to any normal security protocols that you have in case. And this is also very important, because we have to be prepared. We understand the world is just not black and white. So we have to be prepared for whom will we make an exception. There needs to be a protocol. Read about it in your textbook, and then make sure that every exception provided is completely detailed. Reporting and metrics. One of the things that we do with our data that we collect and protect and analyze are the passing along of these details to higher ups. And when I say higher ups, it might be the executive board or the board of governors. It might be the state government. It might be the federal government. It might be a third party payer. The fact is that we do share our data with a lot of other people. So as we are looking at the risk assessment, because remember, that's what we're focused on here is risk, we need to make sure that we are thinking and documenting everything through completely. And think about these 5 questions. What is the real perceived threat? What's the actual problem we are dealing with? What is the risk, as in the impact or the likelihood that this problem will impact us? What is the cost of the safeguard? What do we need to protect this vulnerability? What is the residual risk? Can we have compensating controls? And what is the time frame that we can employ things to lessen or remove this risk issue? And last but not least, we have KRI and KPI. And I know you all are very aware of how many abbreviations and acronyms there are in healthcare. And of course, there are lots in IT. And when you take healthcare and you smush it together with IT, what do you get? Acronyms and abbreviations. So we have KRI, Key Risk Indicator. This is a signal that can let you know about a possible emerging risk or an increase in a low-level risk becoming problematic. And then a key performance indicator, which are metrics that allow you to be alerted to underperformance. Okay, so what does that mean? That means maybe a particular department is not entering their data the way we need them to, or not submitting it in a timely fashion, or whatever it is that we have identified as necessary behavior. Okay? Okay, Domain 4, you got it now. And if you have any questions, of course, include them in the Domain 4 discussion, because I promise you, there are many other people thinking the same exact question.